when all else fails, ham radio works.
Hello, everyone. Today we have on a very special guest, Mr. Josh Greer, KM4AZW. He is an amateur radio operator and the webmaster for our local Briarpatch Amateur Radio Club. Mr. Greer, how are you today?
I'm doing well.
Thank you for coming on. I greatly appreciate it, and I'm excited to talk to you.
Oh, thanks.
My first question is, when did you first learn about amateur radio?
I learned about ham radio when I was part of it was like a preparedness club. It's like a group of people that would get around, gather up and share skills. And I didn't bring a whole lot to the table, but I was probably the most technically inclined. So they were wondering, well, what's a good way to communicate without using cell phones? And so I got stuck with the task of going down the rabbit hole of researching radio. And if you just type in radio communications in Google, that's about the first thing that'll come up is ham radio. So that was my quick introduction to the hobby. And the more I researched it, the more I got interested in it, because you find out pretty quick that it's not just picking up the microphone and talking to people. There's a lot more involved with ham radio. There's a little niche things that you can get into. Once I started researching, I finally figured out how you go about going and taking the exam and getting your ticket. And I went about that by there was a technician class through Virginia Tech, and a friend of mine and I went up there, and we spent a few weeks going to class every week. And at the end, there was a testing session, and so that's how I got my technician license. And then I got to talking to some other hams, and they interested me in HF radio, being able to communicate worldwide, globally. And I had to I was bit with the bug. I had to go get my general upgrade. So I did that about a month later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when was that? How many years ago?
That's been 10 years.
10 years. So you had your renewal.
Your license is good for 10 years. And then you have to renew it. And I just renewed mine. So
that's neat. Yeah. I was talking to someone the other day, and they had just gotten their first renewal too. And it's kind of like a rite of passage of sorts.
Yeah. It definitely is when you're trying to navigate the FCC's website.
Yes. Yeah, no, it's not easy, that's for sure. Chorus is a nightmare. Yeah, you talked about HF radio and getting your general. Were there any topics that challenged you when studying for the general test?
Well, each level of license just builds on the next one. So, if you pass the technician, there's just a little bit more you learn to become general. I work in computers, but I was never involved in like electrical engineering. So the electronics part of it was a little bit of a challenge. And that's probably why I haven't went and gotten my extra yet, is because some of those topics kind of, I'm not proficient enough, confident enough to go and take a test that has questions like that on there. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Were there any resources you used to study besides your initial technician class, like Ham Study or books?
Ham Study is a really great site. The ability to go on there and take as many practice tests as you want. Eventually, you'll see the whole question pool if you do it enough.
Yeah.
I would say the ARRL licensing manuals, those are a really good resource. If you get that and go through it from one cover to the other, you'll be pretty well set to go take your test.
When I took Glenn's class, his technician class earlier this year, that's what he did. We all purchased the ARRL books, and I just went through it, like you said, from one cover to the next, and tested at the end.
Yeah, I think if you can go through the book and take practice tests, once you get to the point where you're making better than an 80%, you should be good to go.
Oh yeah, I agree for sure. You mentioned some of your interests lie in HF. Are there any other parts of the hobby that you're interested in, like CW or digital?
I do love digital. That was probably the first thing that really piqued my interest was packet radio and digital modes. Um, One of the cool things we have at our disposal is a system called WinLink, which gives you the ability to send messages just like emails over radio uh, without any kind of infrastructure in between. So it's very resilient.
For sure, WinLink is pretty neat. You mentioned packet radio, and earlier this year, around July,
Mm-hmm.
you and I did the Golden Packet Challenge on the
Oh,
Appalachian
yes.
Trail. Can you explain a little bit about how APRS works? Because I don't really fully understand it.
Well, APRS has been around for a very long time. I think
Yeah,
its origins are back in the late 80s, early
I think so.
90s.
With bulletin
Um,
board systems.
yeah, and it's very similar. If you hear the packet going across, it'll remind you of like 56K dial up type data. So um, some people think that the acronym stands for automatic position reporting because that's what a lot of people use it for, is just resource tracking and location finding. But it's automatic packet reporting system is what it actually stands for. But so you can use it with a GPS and you can track resources. You can track yourself, or you can do telemetry. So if you have a weather station, is a good example. It can periodically broadcast uh, the weather conditions that it's currently seeing, and everyone who's within earshot of it or another station that's repeating for it can get that information. Um, you can also do like simple messaging through
Mm,
APRS, so you can talk back and forth, like text messaging back and
right.
forth. There's an internet angle to it also, where there's services out on the web where if you can get iGated, where there's a station that's connected to the internet, if it hears you, it can respond back from those services. So, um, like WXBot, if you
Mm,
send a message to WXBot, it'll reply back with the weather forecast for where
huh.
you're currently located.
Neat.
Um, and there's several different services like that, and you're able. Another cool thing is you can actually text somebody's cell phone
Hmm.
over APRS. So it's a valuable tool for your average ham radio guy.
Huh, I didn't know that. My radio that I have, it's a Kenwood, I think a TD710 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I know that it's APRS capable. I just have never figured out how to use it, so it's
Yeah,
something that I would like to get into
yeah, you
more
should
for
dig
sure.
into it. It's pretty fun.
It is. You also have a blog called True Ham Fashion
Oh yes,
that
yes.
you occasionally upload posts to, and one of the posts that I've looked at recently was you bought a True SDX radio and used it to do some of the digital modes. Can you talk a little bit about the True SDX mini radio?
Oh yeah, the True SDX. Um, oh, what was the guy's name? He's a German
It's,
fellow.
yeah, he's foreign.
It's he and another guy came up with the little project, but it's you can buy the radios pre-made if you're not inclined to sit there and solder components
Solder
on
it
a
all.
board. But what
Yeah.
it is it's a tiny miniaturized. I believe it's 5 bands
Mhm.
uh, HF radio that fits inside of a little 3D printed case. It's about the size of a deck of cards, and uh, it's low power, so it's always less than about 5 watts.
Right.
But
QRP.
yeah, it's a QRP radio, but you know you can't beat it for the price. I mean, you can
Hmm.
buy it pre-made for about $125 or $130, I think. But it does have the capability of you can just use a single USB cable and plug into it, and it'll show up as a sound device that you're able to uh, do all the fancy digital modes like WinLink or JSA call or Vera
Can
chat.
you do
You know,
FT8 on it?
Yeah, you can do FT8. I've
Okay.
done several little sessions of FT8 on that little radio. It works pretty well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's neat. Also, I know that you have hunted me a few times on
Yeah.
Parks on the Air. Have you did any activations for Parks on the Air,
I
especially
have
with the True SDX?
I have not yet. It's on my to-do list. Hopefully
Yeah,
when springtime gets here, my schedule will free up a little bit and I can get
yeah,
out to a park at least, if not, walk to the top of a mountain.
yeah. For Summits on the Air, for sure. Um, I know you live around the Whistville area. You could always go to the New River Trail
Oh
and
yeah.
do it on the shot tower too. Because if you do it at the shot tower, you get the credit for two. You get the shot tower and the trail
Oh,
for
okay.
one.
I wasn't sure
So
if you had to like move down to like the Foster Falls where the park was, or
no,
if the
the
rules
if
would let you combine the
yeah,
two.
yeah, it will because New River Trail actually overlaps onto Shot Tower. So as long as you're within the bounds of both, you can count it as two. So just a
Okay,
fun fact.
cool.
When you came back to me earlier in the summer, I was there at the Shot Tower and I got credit for both parks, and you did too because you hunted me.
Nice.
So fun fact. But
I,
if you're
I know. I
ever,
know you tried to do a summit activation. We were doing the
yeah,
packet radio, the
mhm.
Appalachian Trail Golden Packet. Were you successful? Did you get enough contacts for that?
I did. I got around 15 contacts, I think, which
Okay.
was enough. For summits on the year, you only have to have 4 contacts. For parks, you have to have 10.
Okay.
So I got both. That day that I was at the New River Trail at the shot tower, I only got like 6, so I didn't meet the criteria for it to count.
Right.
But yeah, it was a good effort.
Yeah. Good effort.
Yeah, but if you ever are out doing an activation with like some company, I'd be more than happy to join you.
Oh yeah, sure.
Another hobby within amateur radio is satellites. Have you done much satellite working?
I did a little bit.
Hmm.
The first radio I ever had was the ubiquitous UV5R, the little
Hmm.
cheap Chinese
Yep.
handheld, and uh, I played around with making some antennas, and I made a simple directional Yagi style antenna.
Hmm.
And it was kind of heavy because it was the boom and everything was made out of like a piece of 2x4 and
Hmm.
coat hanger for
Yeah.
elements, and it
Yep.
was just whatever I had laying around. And I went out and listened for satellites several times. You can hear the International Space Station is an easy one to
Mhm.
work.
Yeah.
Uh, I made a contact through the SO50 satellite.
Hmm.
I think I've only got one contact confirmed through that one. Uh, it's something you'll notice when you're doing satellite work is it's very busy.
Yes,
If
it
you listen
is.
to it, it's hard to get in when they're just throwing their names and contacts and locations in right after another. It's just a big pile up. So I've only made a few voice contacts that way,
Hmm.
uh, but with a number of satellites, including the International Space Station, you can uh, make contacts through APRS with it
Yeah.
because it also has a digipeater on board. And
Yeah.
that's a whole lot easier to do. And it's nicer
Yeah.
because you can have your computer and a map
Mhm.
and you can see all these stations magically start popping up when the space station flies overhead. So uh, but I think
Yeah.
I made a contact in Florida,
Wow.
uh, Texas, and Louisiana through the International Space Station using its crossband repeat.
Wow.
So
That's very far. I've listened to it, but I've never gotten into it because it's just so busy.
yeah,
Um.
I got
And
lucky those couple of times. It wasn't
yeah.
nearly as busy, but every other time, I just can't get in.
Right. Yeah. I have a discone antenna on the top of this building, and I just hooked it in, and I tried using it to transmit, and I don't even think I was getting into it because it wasn't focused enough to
Oh yeah,
break break into
you
the
you you
repeaters. But
can. I've managed to get into it with like a mobile, like a quarter wave
oh yeah.
mobile antenna. But the trick is you have to have kind of a lower pass.
Mm,
You can't try to contact it when it's a pass when the satellite's
it's
going
directly
directly
above you.
overhead of you
Yeah.
because the the angle of that radiation pattern off that antenna is focused more towards the horizon. So,
right, yeah,
it makes a
that
difference.
Makes sense. That makes sense for sure. Have you gotten any awards like DXCC or worked all states?
I know I've got a few through QRZ. I don't even. I know I registered for Logbook of the World, but I don't think I ever. I don't think I've ever uploaded any logs to it. I'll have to try and get back into it again. But I've done stuff through QRZ and I believe EQSL.
Yeah,
is another place that's fairly popular.
Yeah, a big part of the hobby for me is awards chasing. I think it's fun to work DX stations.
Oh, you like doing the contesting?
Yes, contesting for sure. I don't enjoy the yelling matches, so that's why I'm moving over to Morse code. But it's definitely a whole lot of fun. Have you ever thought about getting serious into contesting?
When I first got my license, I played around in a few contests, but it really wasn't my thing.
I don't blame you.
I mean, I like the idea of collecting contacts from like various countries.
Yeah.
So like some of the little awards I have on QRZ are like worked all states or so many countries. I think it's maybe like 100 countries.
DXCC,
I don't know. I don't think I'm quite there yet, but I'm getting closer.
Yeah, it's hard. It's very challenging to find. And you being a digital guy, maybe easier. I don't know. To break through the noise sometimes with FT8 or whatever it may be. But it's very challenging with sideband to get any DX contacts, and maybe I just haven't been around in the hobby long enough to work the cycle. But I
always blame my call sign. It's hard to understand when you're like in a pile up with a whole bunch of people.
Yeah, that's true. My call sign starts with an A, so I'll say America Echo.
Yeah,
and people usually will pick me out because they hear America, but that's about it. That's all I got going for me.
Yeah, I've still got that long, KM4AZW, and that doesn't stick out at all.
Yeah, the 2x3 for sure. Are there any other parts of the hobby that I haven't covered that you're interested in?
Well, I mean, like emergency communication and public
Oxcom.
Service are mainly what I'm into outside of like playing around with packet radio and the usual ham radio stuff.
Yeah, we've worked several events together. I know we did the bike race. We did that golden packet. I think we've done a couple more, but just using amateur radio to facilitate communications across events.
Yeah, our club is probably one of the more active in the region for doing public service events.
I agree for sure. Can you talk a little bit about why that appeals to you?
It just seems useful. Like being able to use radio to give back to the community. Like some of these events, like the endurance horse rides, and like the trail runs, where the course is out in the middle of the woods in mountainous terrain, where there's no cell phone coverage available. It's a big safety issue. So having the ability for ham radio to have us out there with various checkpoints along the way, just making sure that people make it to where they need to go, or if they have an issue, that they can get the help they need.
Certainly, yeah. And it's a good way to get practice in. I know amateur radio really shined during Hurricane Helene and all the damage that it caused, especially in western North Carolina, and people were able to use the skills that they had practiced during the Oxcom drills and nets and public service events like that to get people help when it really, really mattered.
Right, yeah.
That's cool. Fortunately, we didn't really have to rely on that so much up here in Southwest Virginia.
Yeah, we were lucky. We weren't hit nearly as hard as they were.
I have to ask the question, when are you going to learn Morse code? Because everyone's got to do it.
I know it's on my to-do list. It's one of those things. If you're in ham radio, there's so many little things that you can,
I
so many
know.
boxes you can check.
Right.
I started learning Morse code probably 6 years ago, and I got sidetracked with other things, and I haven't made it back around to it yet. So it's
Yeah.
still on the to-do list.
Yeah. It's challenging for sure. A good way to practice, if you're interested, I've found is there's a podcast called Morse Code Ninja, and you can select how fast you want the code to play, and it'll just send strings of characters for you to spell out
Okay.
words. And you copy it and you practice it. And I do it when I'm driving to school and work and back. And it's a good way to practice. And I've made it up to about 25 words a minute
Oh, cool.
using that method, and I'm somewhat proficient. I can make contacts, but I'm not any high speed contester like some of the guys in the club are.
Well, hey, you'll get there.
You mentioned before we started recording that you have kids. Do you think
Yeah,
that you'll encourage your kids to get into amateur radio?
I've been trying.
Mm-hmm.
uh, I did buy them little walkie talkies so they can,
Yeah.
talk to each other and me when they're running around in the woods and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Something I also did was I got us, well, for me and the family, I got a GMRS license. So
Yeah.
uh, my wife has a little radio that she can take with her and
Mm-hmm.
communicate back with me if she's in range of like one of the repeaters that are set up in the area.
Mm-hmm.
So uh, that's always an option if you have a family member or somebody you want to get interested in radio, but they don't want to jump into taking an exam
Right.
or trying to get their ham radio license. So GMRS is a good
Mm-hmm.
option.
I know some people in the club that have kids did not allow their kids to get their driver's license until they got their ham license. Are you going to be one of those parents?
I don't think so. I don't think I'll be that strict.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's hard enough getting them to do anything. So
Right. getting an amateur radio license may be a stretch. After Hurricane happened, back to look back to it, my family had discussed getting it for like you mentioned, communication, like you
mhm.
mentioned with GMRS. Is that something that your wife has expressed interest in? I know that my mom has talked about it, and my dad has been planning on getting his license as well.
Yeah.
Do you think that you could use ham and specifically like HF to maintain family communications over a distance?
Um, well, one thing I do, like if I'm going out on one of our public service events, if I'm going to be out for like a couple days,
Mm-hmm.
uh, you can use WinLink, like I mentioned before,
Mm-hmm.
because it functions just like email. You can send messages to a real email address, so I can email back and forth with my wife or any of my other friends that aren't hams, and they can send
Mm-hmm.
messages back to me. Um, you can utilize APRS if you have access to that where you are to send text messages back and forth. So there's options out there that
Mm-hmm.
don't require both parties to have a ham radio license to stay in contact.
Yeah, for sure. Have you played around with Meshtastic any?
A little bit. I've
Yeah.
got a couple of those little whiz blocks that I put together and
Hmm.
made a little 3D printed case for, and I've got one sitting here at home, and I have one that I carry around with me in my bag at work.
Mm-hmm.
So it sees a lot more stations when I'm out driving around, and
Hmm.
rather than here because I'm kind of in a hole.
Right. Yeah.
I
I
got
haven't
mountains
heard
all
of.
around me, and I can't hear anything until I go over the mountain, and then all of a sudden I see
Hear everything.
stations
Right.
in Withville all the way up to past Roanoke.
Huh. Wow. I haven't heard of WizBlock. What is that?
Um, it's from a company called Rack Wireless,
Okay.
RAK Wireless, and it's kind of a modular board they sell. So the board, you can snap the radio module on there, and then you can add whatever else you want. So they sell like temperature sensors, various different sensors and stuff you can add to it if you want that functionality, and GPS. But it's got a built-in uh, solar charging circuit and
Ah.
a battery control circuit, I believe. So it was a nice little kit that I found that I could just shove in a little case and take with me. It
That is
seemed a little
neat.
more robust. Like if you were going to build one of these mesh-tastic radios and just throw it up on a tower or someplace where it was hard to get, that seemed
Mhm.
like the kit you wanted to buy.
Right.
I
Yeah.
know there's all kinds of other little cheap ones. I think
Yeah.
they start at like $13 or $14 for
Yeah.
the
They're pretty
real
cheap.
cheap ones.
Mhm. That's part of the hobby that I've wanted to get into, or I guess it's technically separate from amateur radio, but it's all radio
Mm.
adjacent,
Oh
and
yeah,
it's neat for sure.
yeah. Any kind of like, I think anyone who's into hobbyist electronics
Mhm.
would get a lot from ham radio.
Oh yeah.
Like even if you weren't looking to use ham radio specific frequencies, just getting that knowledge of radio is very useful.
Oh, I agree, certainly. Like you said, you worked in technology. It's helped me understand how Wi-Fi works better and
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
different different things like that for sure. And drones too, FPV drones. They
Uh-huh.
use some drones use amateur radio licenses
Mm-hmm.
frequencies in the 900 megahertz range. So that
Yeah, I didn't realize that when I took that technician class at Virginia Tech, and at the end of it, we had the licensing exam.
mhm.
And the class I was in only had 10 or 15 people, and then when I went to the testing session, it was packed full. It was
You're
like
right.
standing room only.
Yeah.
And I started talking to some of them, and the majority of people there were part of a drone program at the college, and that's what they
Mhm.
were there for.
Yep.
They were either there for the drone program or they were studying meteorological stuff, and that was
Hmm.
part of their requirement for their classes. They had to get a
Really?
ham radio license. Yeah.
That's neat. I do know, fun fact, that astronauts are required to have at least a technician license, but I haven't heard anything about meteorological and amateur radio. That's interesting. Oh, yeah. As we're wrapping up, I'll ask you a couple more quick rapid fire questions.
Okay.
Um, if you could describe ham radio in one sentence, how would you do it?
Oh man. When all else fails, ham radio works.
Right. Good. I like it.
That's their little slogan.
Yes, it is. And have you seen the stickers that say Tesla was right on the back of cars and stuff?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
My next question is, what advice would you give to someone who just got their license and they're afraid to get on the mic, get on the air?
That was me. I'm always kind of awkward when I'm talking on the radio or any other time, really. But something that helped me was I had like a list of questions I carried in like a little notebook, just like open questions
Mm-hmm.
to get conversations started and to keep them going. Um, but if you can make a few contacts and get to know some of your local
Mm-hmm.
hams, that really helps a lot too, because then you're just talking to a friend on the radio.
Yeah, for sure. When did you get involved with the local club?
Not long after I got my license, eventually I started playing around with antennas, and I made a simple ground plane antenna.
Mm-hmm.
And I was outside holding it in the air and trying to get the repeater with a little cheap radio. And I finally got the repeater to respond back to me. And on the other side was Glenn Sage.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked to him for a few minutes, and uh, I think he was having uh, an Oxcom meeting. He had a emergency uh, communications group called Oxcom back
Mm-hmm.
then when I first got my license. And that Thursday he was going to have a meeting, so he invited me to that meeting. So
Mm-hmm.
I was able to get involved with that, and then at that meeting I learned about the Briarpatch Amateur Radio Club. So
Yeah.
within a couple weeks of getting my license, I got involved in the emergency communications club and the Briarpatch Amateur Radio Club.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool. That's a little bit different. I learned about amateur radio through the club, so
Right.
it came about from different angles for sure. Um, Before we wrap up the episode, are there any topics that you would like to discuss that I forgot to ask about?
Have you ever heard of EME?
Oh yeah, Earth Moon Earth.
Yeah,
Have you done
moon
it?
bounce. I've never done it. It takes a lot to do it.
It does.
It takes a very large antennas and very powerful radios to do that.
Yeah, enough to like burn through you.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And
But that's a really neat concept to be able to use the moon as a reflector and talk to somebody back on Earth.
and meteorite trails too.
Oh yes, meteor scatter.
Yeah, that's cool. Have you ever successfully used like 6 meters to do DX?
I'm still playing with 6 meters. I don't have a proper 6 meter antenna up, so
Yeah.
using my long wire is kind of a compromise on 6 meters.
Yeah. What? Yeah. Let's talk about your station. What kind of radio do you have?
I primarily use a Yaesu FT891.
That's what I have.
And I keep it in like it's the off-brand Harbor Freight Pelican case. I have it in there with a battery and everything so that I can just open it up, and if I want to go somewhere, I can close it and carry it with me like a briefcase and open it up somewhere else. So I'm prepared to go do a POTA at some point. So that's HF, and then my VHF, UHF, local kind of stuff is I have what is this? An Anytone AT. It's a UV 88 something. It's just a little. It's one of the more inexpensive dual band with an actual dual receiver, so you can hear two stations at the same time.
Wow, that's nice.
Yeah. And I have a little Kenwood TM281 that I was using that as my primary radio for many years, and then I moved it over, and now it's just my packet radio. It's just sitting here running APRS right now. So.
What does your antenna situation look like? Do you have a big tower, or is it just wire in a tree?
I have about a 30 odd foot pole that I have kind of bolted to the side of the house as a kind of a makeshift mast, and on top of it I have a dual band J pole from Arrow. That's primary antenna, and then I also have a bunch of J poles right now. I'd like to upgrade to something a little nicer, but I've got the dual band J pole at the top of that mast, and then further down I've got a J pole that's made for GMRS, and then off to the other side of my roof line I've got a 2 meter only J pole that I have set up with my packet radio APRS station.
Are those copper J poles?
Yeah, they're the Arrow is like a piece of extruded aluminum with some aluminum rod that comes out the top.
Okay.
So it's got like a long element for 2 meters, and then a shorter for
70.
70, and then the little stub that it uses to tune.
Okay, cool.
And then for HF, I have a 174 foot long wire hooked to a 9-to-1 Ballon or Unun, and it's just in a little box, and I have it screwed in the eave of the roof with the wire strung out to a tree on the other side of the property. So
yeah, that's what we have. So is that an infed random wire?
Yeah, it's a random wire.
Okay, yeah. And do you have a tuner on with your radio?
I have it's the MFJ. Oh, what is this thing's? MFJ 939 is the tuner I have, and it does.
Do you like it?
Yeah, it's great. Yeah. It's kind of sad. MFJ's gone now as a company, so it'll be hard to find those. But I've had really good luck out of it. It can tune just about anything.
I'm in the market for a tuner, and I'm debating buying one of those ATU 100s. They're kits that you build. I don't know if you've seen them. But
I've seen those, yeah.
I don't know if the tuners just seem like it'd be hard to build correctly. They're so finicky.
a lot of toroids you have to wind.
Right, and I don't know that I want to do that. Thank you, Mr. Greer. I greatly appreciate you giving me your time tonight.
Oh yeah, it's good talking with you.